When Emily was only 24, she thought her whole life was stretching wide open ahead of her, the way sunlight spills across a field on a spring morning, endless and full of promise. But fate had other plans. And sometimes life doesn't ask if you're ready before it tests the very core of who you are. Because on a rainy night in Chicago, with the streets slick and headlights smearing into long blurs across the glass, she was driving home from her late nursing shift when a truck ran a red light and slammed into her small car, twisting steel around her body like it was nothing more than paper, and in the silence after the crash, broken only by her own shallow breathing, she realized she could not feel her legs, a numbness spreading from her waist down that terrified her more than the blood dripping from her forehead, and as the paramedics pulled her from the wreck, she clung to a fragile thread of consciousness, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone could hear, asking only for the strength to survive. And when she woke in the sterile white of the hospital, tubes in her arms and monitors beeping steadily, she saw her mother's red-rimmed eyes and the grim face of the doctor, and before he even spoke, she knew the words that would fall from his lips like stones. Her spinal cord was severely damaged, and she would likely never walk again, and in that moment the world seemed to crumble around her. All her dreams of dancing at her sister's wedding, hiking the mountains she loved, running down the hospital corridors as a nurse with laughter and energy, gone in a blink, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence inside her chest. But Emily was not the kind of person who surrendered easily, though at first she wanted to, though at first she let herself drown in nights of tears and questions. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? And the weight of despair was real, pressing down on her, until one afternoon when her little nephew climbed onto her hospital bed and asked innocently if she could still chase him at the park, and Emily realized that though her legs might be broken, her spirit did not have to be, and that tiny spark began to grow, fed by the quiet support of her family. The gentle encouragement of a physical therapist who refused to let her give up, and the stubborn part of her heart that whispered maybe. Just maybe, the doctors were wrong, maybe she could write a different ending. So she started small, moving toes that everyone said would never move, celebrating each flicker of muscle like it was a miracle, enduring hours of grueling therapy with sweat and tears, falling countless times but pulling herself up again, her hands raw from gripping parallel bars, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Yet every setback only carved her resolve deeper, and she kept telling herself that even if she failed, she wanted to fail fighting, not surrendering. And slowly the impossible began to shift, her legs trembling but holding her weight for seconds at a time, then longer, until one morning nearly a year after the accident, she took a shaky step forward while her therapist watched with tears streaming down his face, and her mother clapped her hands in disbelief, and Emily herself sobbed. Not because she was healed completely, but because she proved to herself that the word never doesn't get to define her life, and from there, her comeback became not just about walking, but about living with a fire she never knew before, because when you've stared at the edge of hopelessness and stepped back, every sunrise feels like a gift, and Emily went further than anyone imagined, walking across the stage at her graduation with braces strapped to her legs, refusing the wheelchair that was offered, determined to cross under her own strength, and the applause thundered through the auditorium, echoing her triumph, and her story spread, not because she was extraordinary in some superhuman way, but because she was human in every way, fragile yet fierce, broken yet unyielding, and people saw themselves in her struggle, felt their own buried strength awaken as they heard her say that life doesn't end when you're told it's over, it begins when you choose to fight for it, and Emily kept choosing, day after day. Building a career as a nurse despite the pain, mentoring other patients who had been told, never, telling them softly, don't let anyone write your ending for you. And she became a symbol of resilience in her community, speaking at events, sharing stages with people she once admired from afar, each time reminding herself that the comeback is not about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. And her journey continued with setbacks too, because comebacks aren't clean lines, they're messy, filled with moments when progress feels lost and despair knocks again. But every time she stumbled, she remembered that rainy night, the sound of metal crushing, the cold numbness, and how far she had come since then, and she found the courage to keep going, until years later she stood at her sister's wedding, not in a wheelchair as the doctors predicted, but upright, steady, holding her father's arm, tears streaming down her cheeks as she swayed gently to the music, and her family looked on, speechless, their hearts bursting with pride because she had rewritten her destiny. And in that moment Emily understood that her story was bigger than herself. It was about everyone who had ever been told they couldn't, everyone who had ever been counted out, and she knew that her comeback, her refusal to surrender, would echo far beyond her own life, reminding countless souls that the word impossible is just a dare waiting to be challenged. And if you listen closely to her story, you would hear not just the triumph of one woman, but the heartbeat of resilience itself, whispering to all of us that no matter how deep the fall, the rise can always be greater. And in that truth, her journey became not just a comeback, but a beacon of hope for the world.